Lord Moylan.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to speak after the noble Lady Meacher, who makes important points about delegated legislation, which no doubt we'll return to. I should start by declaring that I'm an honorary fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects. I can assure noble Lords this doesn't qualify me in any way, quite the reverse, to practice architecture, but I mention it because Section 11 of this bill is devoted to the architectural profession. And although the RIBA is not a professional regulator, noble Lords will note from the text of the bill that that role is reserved by statute to the Architects Registration Board. Nonetheless, the clause may affect its members. Now, in that respect, it is a matter of regret that the current consultation that the government has been undertaking on changes to the Architects Act has not actually been published in time for consideration at this debate. I understand that it's expected imminently. It is a pity that it's not available today, but I hope my noble friend, the Minister, will be able to give some assurance that that response will be available before we reach committee stage, because it is necessary, in my view, or it would at least be extremely helpful in addressing Section 11 if we could understand the context of policy in which the government sees this whole question going forward. Now, moving on from that, I broadly welcome the bill. I share, in many ways, the enthusiasm of the noble Baroness Lady Noakes for the scrapping of EU legislation, but like many other noble Lords, I'm somewhat confused by the bill. And I think, in some ways, it's not helped by the order in which the sections of the bill are written. There's a degree of randomness about them, because really the start of the bill is Section 4. Section 4 is the heart of the whole thing, and it is a permissive section, a permissive clause, which allows the professional bodies that are in scope of the bill to enter into agreements with corresponding organisations in other countries. And there can't really be an objection to that. The only question, as has been hinted at by certain noble Lords, is why in a free society such permission is necessary from the government. But nonetheless, it can't in itself be objected. But then, having addressed Section 4, we need to turn back to Section 1, and this makes a very important point. It says that there may be, in effect, what it says is there may be cases where the public interest requires that the government should intervene in order to ensure that those professional regulators are undertaking, or at least creating, a route by which those mutual recognitions can be put in place. The sort of assumption here is that there is a sort of recalcitrance on the part, or a failure on the part, of the professional organisations to do and to carry out what they are permitted to do by Section 4. And I don't object to that as such. Of course, in many cases, there may be reasons of public interest as to why the government might want to act to make something happen. But it isn't a very strong clause. Out of respect for the professional bodies or professional regulators, all that the clause does is require them to put in place a route whereby such applications can be processed. There is nothing in the clause which mandates them actually to approve anybody or to ensure that something is coming through the envisaged pipeline. So if it is there to address a public interest, it seems to me to be rather weak as a measure for addressing what would have been an identified public interest. Now, a public interest is a very broad thing. I mean, one could imagine a public interest that covers a whole range of matters in which the government could quite properly want to take an interest and ensure that action by the professional bodies was going to occur. But then we turn to Clause 2. And Clause 2 then does something else. It says there is only one public interest which will allow the government to take steps under Clause 1. There is only one public interest that we're going to contemplate and authorise. And that is a lack, or is a lack of supply, if you see what I mean, to meet something called demand. in the domestic workforce. So we're now going to say that having taken this power, this reasonable power, to act in the public interest, the government is going to limit it, not a very strong power, but a reasonable power. The government is going to limit itself to using it only where there is a demonstrated demand. Now, I find this perhaps the part of the bill that causes me most concern. And here I am sort of hinting and repeating to some extent things certain other noble lords have said or hinted at. The first is, it does seem to me to limit the public interest, the sense of public interest, unnecessarily tightly. I've made that point. The second is, as some noble lords have indicated, it is going to lead to endless debate about footling questions that are bound to end up, in many cases, as the subject of judicial review. What is the right number of tax accountants for Wales? Or what is the appropriate number of lawyers or faculties or advocates, rather, in Scotland? There is no right answer to these questions, but this is the substance of a debate that the government is inviting upon itself every time it seeks to exercise the powers granted to it. I say the government, of course, here I mean the national authorities, because it will not necessarily be this government which will be exercising the power. But every time the national authority chooses to exercise this power, it is walking straight into this quagmire, and I simply don't see any reason for it. The third thing is that it links the bill to immigration. Now, a great deal of the debate we've had this afternoon has actually not really been about professional qualifications, but about the recognition of professional qualifications, but about the right to work in the United Kingdom. Now, it seems to me that this bill, although it stretches into the world of immigration, has no immigration effects. Simply having this qualification, even if there is a demand for it, doesn't necessarily give you the right to work here. No work permit flows from this. So one is treading into the world of immigration policy without actually having an effect on it. And that, I think, complicates the bill in a very unnecessary way. Now, as background to my remarks, I have to say this won't necessarily be welcome to the many professionally qualified people who've spoken in the course of this debate. I hasten to add, in case there was any doubt, I have no professional qualifications at all, so I'm not amongst them in any sense, is that while I don't share the caustic view of the noble Lord Sicker of the professional bodies in his own sphere of activity, I do come with a certain sort of scepticism and suspicion that professions very often do seek to limit entry into their profession with a view to generating a scarcity premium, and that many regulators, I have to say, criticise me if you like, do end up being captured by the professions they seek to regulate. So my worry about connecting this to immigration is that it actually puts the debate in the wrong place, and it gives to the regulators the notion that they are there as an arm of the immigration system, whereas what we want is for them to be there carrying out as objectively as possible the accreditation of foreign qualifications to the standard that the bill requires. And that may be a standard that changes in the course of further stages, but to the standard that the bill requires. And that ought to be a process, it seems to me, that has no consequence or connection to immigration at all. And all that made me think that actually the bill might be better without Section 2 at all. Now, all of that is something that can be tested later. I hope this is, I've sort of laid out what I see to be the main issues, but I must end by saying how grateful I am to my noble friend, the Minister, for the time that he has given to me in discussing these issues and explaining them to me. And while I feel I do understand the bill better as a consequence of that, it may be that he has yet more to teach me, that I may not understand it well, and that he may win me over entirely to his point of view. But we have opportunities to pursue that over the coming weeks, and I look forward to them.